The vast reaches of the galaxy stretched in silence, stars burning cold and ancient. But that silence was shattered the day the Dominion of Zitherus turned its gaze toward the small blue planet humans called Earth, a world dismissed by most interstellar civilizations as primitive, fragile, and inconsequential. Yet to the ruling council of Zitherus it appeared as nothing more than another stepping stone for expansion, another banner to raise in their endless conquest. For the Dominion had spent centuries building itself into a machine of domination, with fleets stretching across the void like skeletal leviathans, consuming world after world, enslaving those who resisted, and wiping clean the ones who dared defy. And at the helm of this empire stood the cold, calculating, and supremely arrogant warlord Syraxus, a commander bred in the cradle of war, whose black eyes had seen hundreds of planets burn, yet who remained, unsatisfied, forever hungering for more, driven by an unshakable belief that the Dominion was destiny incarnate, ordained to rule all sentient life. When reports first came from his scouts about Earth, Syraxus barely registered it. A planet circling a yellow star on the outskirts of the Orion Arm, inhabited by a species just beginning to grasp the basics of space travel, still reliant on fragile rockets and crude satellites, a civilization fractured by politics and war yet clinging to hope, laughter, and dreams. Qualities Syraxus considered weaknesses, and so, with the disdain of a predator spotting easy prey, he authorized the expedition, assigning command to one of his most decorated generals, Elara Veyran, whose name alone brought terror to conquered colonies, a being with skin like obsidian armor and a voice that carried like grinding steel. Veyran saw Earth not as a challenge but as an opportunity to remind the galaxy of the Dominion's unrelenting might. And so he gathered his fleet, colossal warships that blotted out the stars, each bristling with weapons capable of burning oceans dry and reducing continents to ash, and set course for the unsuspecting world. Earth's people were not prepared, not truly, though whispers of strange signals and flickering shadows in the upper atmosphere unsettled a few watchful eyes. Scientists and dreamers who had long believed humanity was not alone. Yet even they could not imagine the scale of what descended when Veyran's armada arrived, a storm of black metal tearing through the skies, blotting out the sun, and within hours the invasion began, swift, merciless, and apocalyptic. Cities crumbled beneath plasma fire, skyscrapers toppled like paper towers, oceans boiled as orbital bombardments scorched the seas, and the air filled with the screams of billions as chaos consumed every corner of the planet. The Dominions, soldiers, towering insectile figures clad in armor that shimmered like night, swept across the ruins, slaughtering indiscriminately, rounding up survivors for chains, laboratories, or execution, while resistance armies, brave but hopelessly outmatched, fired their bullets and rockets into the abyss only to watch them vanish against shields that deflected all but the fiercest weapons. In the midst of this apocalypse, small pockets of humanity fought back with a fury that startled even the invaders. Ragtag militias, fractured nations uniting against a common foe, men and women who refused to surrender even as their homes burned. And this defiance, though futile on the battlefield, planted a seed of unease in Veyran's mind. For though he crushed their armies, toppled their monuments, and declared Earth subdued within a month, he could not shake the sight of human eyes, staring back at him not broken but burning with something raw, dangerous, something that whispered of vengeance. Warlord Syraxus, upon receiving the news of conquest, laughed at the suggestion, dismissing humanity's resistance as the last gasps of a dying race, ordering their remnants to be enslaved, dissected, or used as fodder for experiments, and thus began a nightmare that fused horror with cruelty. The survivors of Earth were scattered among Dominion strongholds, some forced into mines where the sun never reached, others strapped to tables where alien surgeons probed their biology, dissecting their resilience with detached curiosity, still others thrown into gladiatorial pits to fight for the amusement of their captors. And yet through all of this suffering something began to shift quietly, invisibly like a shadow beneath the surface. Humanity, fractured and bleeding, did not break. They adapted, learning from their tormentors, stealing fragments of technology, passing whispers of rebellion through coded songs and carved marks in prison walls, their hatred simmering into a weapon sharper than any blade. and among the countless enslaved arose a name that would echo across the stars. Elara Veyran, once a decorated pilot of Earth's final air squadrons, captured during the fall of Tokyo, forced into a Dominion labor colony on the industrial moon of Thrixus, where she endured years of pain and humiliation, yet never yielded her will, her spirit becoming a beacon for the broken, gathering around her other survivors, engineers, scientists, soldiers, ordinary men and women who had lost everything, and together they began to plot, to dream of vengeance not as fantasy, but as inevitability. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, rumors spread like wildfire carried by smugglers, mercenaries, and the few neutral civilizations still untouched by Dominion conquest. Tales of the humans, a species that should have perished under Dominion wrath, but instead endured. Whispers that the fire in their eyes was unlike anything seen before, that their capacity for rage and survival bordered on the unnatural, and these whispers began to take root in the minds of other oppressed peoples, stirring questions long buried. Could the Dominion be challenged? Could even the smallest ember spark a blaze strong enough to consume an empire? For the Dominion, such notions were laughable, and yet, deep within the cold halls of Syraxus's throne, even he could not entirely dismiss the faint chill that crawled along his spine whenever reports arrived of human uprisings, sabotage, or prisoners who died rather than break. And though he barked dismissals and ordered harsher punishments, something in the void had shifted. The silence of the stars now laced with an undercurrent of dread. For the humans, once prey, had tasted the abyss, and in that darkness they were becoming something else. Something no one, not even the mighty Dominion, had foreseen, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the day when the vengeance of Earth would rise like a storm. On the moon of Thrixus, where the Dominion's factories belched endless smoke into a blood-red sky, Elara Veyran's fire was no longer a flicker, but a blaze smoldering beneath the surface, her years of servitude forging not submission, but resolve. And though she bent her back under the Dominion's lash, her mind was sharp, watching, listening, learning, for every humiliating order barked by her captors, every scream from a fellow prisoner dissected in laboratories or crushed in mining shafts, only hardened her conviction that humanity had not been extinguished, but tempered, transformed into something that would one day return with a vengeance so great the stars themselves would shudder. At first her rebellion was a whisper, a glance exchanged in the shadows, a coded phrase carved into the stone of a cell, but whispers became meetings, and meetings became plans, until the enslaved humans of Thrixus began to see Elara not as a fellow captive but as a leader. Her name passed from lips cracked with thirst and throats raw with screams, carrying the promise that humanity would not die in chains, and through stolen fragments of Dominion technology smuggled out of scrapyards, or bribed from alien black market traders, they began to piece together weapons crude at first but sharp enough to spill Dominion blood. The first strike was small, a single patrol of Dominion enforcers ambushed in the winding tunnels of the factory district, their bodies dragged into furnaces before alarms could ring. But small victories ignite great infernos, and soon sabotage swept across Thrixus. Reactors overloaded, weapons depots mysteriously exploded, guard barracks poisoned with toxins brewed from native plants. And though the Dominion cracked down with ruthless efficiency, executing hundreds, they could not kill the whispers. Nor could they erase the haunting reality that the humans, the species they had conquered so easily, were fighting back with a ferocity that seemed almost supernatural. Across the galaxy, other human survivors scattered on mining colonies, in laboratories, or deep within gladiatorial arenas began to hear of these whispers, carried by smugglers and deserters, and slowly, painfully, a network began to form, tenuous at first but growing, connecting the broken pieces of humanity into a web of resistance stretching across star systems. And at the center of that web stood Elara, now hardened by scars but unbroken, her once bright eyes now dark coals that burned with an intensity that unnerved even her allies. For she carried not only the will of humanity, but the weight of their collective rage. In time, the resistance grew bold enough to attempt the unthinkable, the theft of a Dominion warship, and though dozens died in the attempt, they succeeded, capturing the frigate Zarathion, a vessel bristling with plasma cannons and shield, generators far beyond anything humanity had ever touched. And when Elara stood upon its bridge, staring into the void with her hands gripping controls alien yet already familiar, she felt the first tremor of destiny, the sense that humanity's vengeance had finally found its blade. With the Zarathion came freedom of movement, and soon raids erupted across Dominion space. Supply convoys ambushed in asteroid belts, communication stations reduced to burning wreckage, slave camps liberated in midnight strikes that left Dominion commanders gutted and strung up as warnings. And with each act of defiance, the legend of humanity grew, whispered in cantinas on neutral worlds, traded in fearful tones among smugglers, and even sung in secret by other enslaved peoples who had long since lost hope. For if the humans, a species broken and scattered, could rise from the ashes, perhaps the Dominion was not as invincible as it claimed. Syraxis, upon hearing these reports, scoffed at first, dismissing them as minor nuisances. But when entire outposts began vanishing overnight, their garrisons slaughtered with surgical precision, his confidence began to crack, and though he never admitted fear, his orders grew more desperate, demanding harsher retaliation, the extermination of any planet suspected of harboring humans, even if it meant the deaths of billions of innocents. But such cruelty only spread the fire further, turning once neutral worlds against the Dominion, who now saw them not as gods of conquest but butchers whose time had come. As for the humans, each victory was paid in blood, for their ships were few and their numbers limited. Yet each loss only deepened their rage, shaping them into warriors who fought not merely to survive but to annihilate their oppressors. Their tactics unlike any seen in the galaxy, unpredictable, savage, and terrifying, mixing ingenuity with desperation. They would ram their ships into Dominion cruisers, detonate stolen reactors as suicide bombs, or infiltrate fortresses with nothing but blades and stolen explosives. Acts of defiance so horrifying that even hardened Dominion veterans spoke of them with dread, calling them the Revenants, as if the humans were no longer mortal but spirits of vengeance rising from their own graves. Elara herself became more than a leader, more than a symbol. She became a myth, her name spoken in the same breath as nightmares. Dominion propaganda plastered her face across star systems with labels of terrorist, butcher, and shadow queen. Yet these warnings only added to her legend, for every execution order failed. Every bounty hunter sent after her returned in pieces, and those who met her in person swore there was something in her presence, an aura of unyielding defiance, a coldness born of suffering and fire, that marked her as more than human. And even among her own people, whispers spread that Elara was no longer just a woman but the embodiment of humanity's wrath itself. As the years passed, humanity's fractured cells united under her banner, forming what would later be known as the Phantom Fleet, a patchwork armada of stolen Dominion ships, retrofitted freighters, and jury-rigged weapons that somehow fought with the precision of a predator, striking where the Dominion was weakest, vanishing into the void before reinforcements could arrive, their banners marked not with symbols of nations long dead, but with a single sigil, a broken chain wreathed in fire. The galaxy, once silent in the shadow of Dominion rule, now buzzed with fear and uncertainty, for where once Syraxis's empire was thought eternal, now whispers claimed its days were numbered, and in cantinas, slave camps, and even the corridors of neutral governments one phrase echoed like a prophecy. The humans are coming, a phrase that carried equal parts hope and terror, for though the oppressed saw salvation in their rise, the Dominion and its allies began to fear that humanity was not simply fighting for freedom, but for something darker, a vengeance that would not stop with liberation, but consume everything, leaving nothing untouched. Syraxis himself began to feel the creeping chill of inevitability, for though he marshaled fleets, executed generals for failure, and unleashed horrors of his own design, he could not stop the momentum of a species that seemed to grow stronger. The more it suffered, and in his private chambers he sometimes stared into the void, wondering if in their conquest of Earth they had awakened something far worse than any foe before, something primal, relentless, and unstoppable, a predator born of grief and rage, now stalking the Dominion across the stars. And though he swore never to admit it, Syraxis could no longer silence the whisper at the back of his mind that humanity was not rising. They were hunting.